teachers, which is conducted today. And then we have the second sessions that will be conducted on Tuesday, on the 22nd November 2022 at the same time at 4 o'clock in the Pontianak and 9 o'clock in the morning in Belfast time. The second session is about qualitative research methods. And the last one is on Thursday. This is our last sessions for guest lecture with Dr. Aisling. So it's gonna be like on 24th of November. And the topic is about engaging with qualitative research publications written in English. So our session will be divided into two sessions. The first one is explanations or lecture from Dr. Aslings. But if you have some questions and then you have that in the middle of the lecture, it is fine. You raise your hand. Is it fine, Dr. Aisling? Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, so whenever you raise the questions, don't hesitate to click the button hands up, and then after that, Dr. Aisling will respond to your questions. However, if you don't have questions during the lecture sessions, you can have that at the end of our guest lecture today. Okay, so we have 2 hour session, but perhaps maybe 15 minutes earlier since we have a prayer time at 5:45 in Pontianak time. Okay, before we start, I would like to read Dr. Aisling mobile profile. Dr. Aisling is the senior lecturer at School of Social Science, Education and Social Work at Queen's University Belfast. She teaches master students as well as doctoral students at Queen's University Belfast. Besides teaching, Dr. Aisling has a role of Director of Internalizations and Director of Center for Language Education Research. Okay, that's all about Dr. Aisling profile. Dr. Aisling, do you mind if we call you Ibu Aisling? Ibu is the way we address a lady in Indonesia to give a respect or honor. So, so
Please
Ibu,
feel free. That's okay.
Thank you, Ibu Aisling. Okay, Ibu Aisling, please take your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along to these guest lectures. I'm very honoured and very privileged. I have the pleasure of knowing Dr. Veni Carolina from her work here, from her research work here in Queen's University Belfast. So I'm very delighted and honoured to be invited today to these sessions. Okay, I would like to share my screen if that's okay. So I'll try my best.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay. There we go. Oops. There we go. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so just this is who I am, and thank you very much, Dr. Veni Carolina, for the introduction. This is just to let you know who I am. A little bit more about me is that I have also had the great pleasure of supervising master's dissertation students and doctoral students who come from Indonesia, and it has always been a pleasure and a privilege. So just to say thank you for inviting me, and I really look forward to spending the next few sessions with you. If you want further information about me and about what I do, the links are here if you're interested, and all the PowerPoint presentations will be made available to you. I'll either pop them into the chat in the Zoom or send them via Dr. Carolina, whatever's easiest for you, but you have access to them. As Dr. Carolina said, I'm very happy to take questions at any point. If you want to put them into the chat or if you want to put your hand up, that's absolutely fine. And I'll also make sure and have some questions time at the end if you want to use that too. We will be seeing each other again on Tuesday and Thursday. So if you have some questions over the weekend, that's brilliant. That's brilliant too. Okay, so I'm very happy to answer any questions. So if you're thinking about questions and you want to ask them on next Tuesday or next Thursday, that's perfectly okay too. Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll just get started at the moment. I just want you, so that we have a shared understanding. Can you all hear me okay, is the first thing?
Yes,
If you want to...
it's very clear.
Okay, perfect. That's great. That's brilliant. Okay. So first of all, it was really interesting to receive this invitation, because it seems to me a very specific area that we want to have a look at. And my understanding is that everyone here is a pre-service chemistry teacher. Is that correct?
Yes, and some of them are lecturers as well.
Oh, fabulous. That's fabulous. I'm going to say now, I know nothing about chemistry. I'm just going to say that now. I know nothing about chemistry. And so please forgive any baby mistakes that you see here if I reference chemistry. You are the experts there, not me. So I'll apologize for that in advance. But what I think we do share is that we are teachers. Primarily, we are teachers. So I have been a teacher in both young learners, teenage learners, adult learners, university students. So that's what we share. We share an interest in teaching and in being able to make learning and teaching a good experience. So what I would like to introduce us to in this first session is some examples of teacher education and classroom science learning which have used qualitative research. Okay, and I want us to think about why it's relevant for you as pre-service chemistry teachers to better understand qualitative research. We also need to say what qualitative research is and also what it's not. Okay, so we'll do that today as well. In our second session, we'll be going more in depth into particular methods used in qualitative research, and we will also be considering what the advantages of them are, what the challenges of them are, and we will also be considering very common ways of analysing qualitative data. Okay, that's really important. It's really important that we're really clear about how it is that we present results of qualitative data and we discuss findings of qualitative research. Sometimes it's easier to follow a formula for quantitative research, the presentation of a report. But also, I hope by the end of our sessions, you'll see that it's actually just as, if you like, easy to produce those reports for qualitative research as well. Okay, and in our last session, we'll be having a very close look at how we report in qualitative research studies, looking at both the structure and organisation of research publications using qualitative research. That helps us to both read qualitative research and, if it's something that you're interested in, to write about qualitative research as well. Okay, so those are our 3 sessions. As I said before, I'm really happy to take questions throughout and questions in between as well. So, okay, right. I was once told by a very famous academic, that the very best way to begin any teaching is to start with a story. So I'm going to begin with a story. And this is a story of Miss Jones, the science teacher. So Miss Jones stared at a pile of science tests that she had just marked. She wondered what went wrong. She thought about the lesson plans and she wondered, what should she have done differently? What's wrong with Mrs. Jones? What's Mrs. Jones's problem? Does anybody want to come on and say? Why is Mrs. Jones wondering?
Is that because the score of the students are really bad?
Yes. The
Oh,
score of the students were really bad. And so that made Miss Jones wonder about what was she doing in their science classrooms that weren't matching with how the students learn or what the students were doing in the classrooms. So we all find ourselves in those positions where we've spent a long time planning for lessons, a long time finding the right materials, and somehow the learning isn't happening. And so that's very often why it's important for all teachers to be engaged in research, to conduct research. And I suppose one of the things, and this all references here are at the end so that you can have a look at. So Miss Jones she's not alone. She's not alone in wondering, how do I improve my student learning? How do I improve my classroom instruction? Okay, so this is very much focused on the learning and the teaching side of it, less so on the chemistry, and I'll come to that later. So it is really important for science teachers, new science teachers, experienced science teachers, to be engaged in research, which is about understanding better the learning environment, the processes of learning for students, and teaching practices as well. And so improving student achievement, we as educators must determine what's working and what's not working. Okay, so how can we do that? How can we find out what's working and what's not working? Okay, how do you know? If I could ask if colleagues and participants want to come on or want to pop into the chat, how do you find out what's working and what's not working in your classrooms? Does anybody want to come on? How do you find that out?
You can answer in the chats if you don't, if you
Sure.
feel reluctant to speak. It's okay in the chat box, everyone. Perhaps the participant is shy, Dr. Ashley.
I think that's, and that's okay. That's okay. I would be very shy too. I haven't met you before. I have the pleasure of knowing Dr. Carolina, but please, take your time and don't worry about participating. Don't worry about making mistakes in English. Don't worry about any of those things. The important thing is that we share the same information as we go along. Okay. All right. So my question was, if I go back just one, how do we know if things work in a classroom or if things don't work in a classroom? Well, we can investigate. We can explore. We can find out. We can examine. We can search. All of these words, all of these verbs, all of these actions are all of the things that teachers can do in a classroom to be able to find out what works and what doesn't work. You have an example here of tests, okay? And tests very often measure achievement, measure success, but they aren't the only way. Okay, and that's important to understand, is that tests are just one way of measuring certain aspects of learning and certain aspects of teaching. Okay, so we need to think about other ways that we can investigate, we can explore how learning happens in our classrooms. One of the most, and I say this to some of the teachers that I work with, one of the easiest ways to begin to find out what works in classrooms is to look. It's to look really carefully and see, what are your students doing? When you give them a task, when you give them an experiment, when you give them a worksheet, look at what they do. Do they talk to someone else to help them with the worksheet? Is that a good thing or not a good thing? Well, sharing and explaining answers can be a good thing. It can help both students. It can help the student who doesn't quite know the information, and it can also help the student who does know the information to explain it to someone who doesn't know. So you look at those. So looking around a classroom, taking time to look can be a really easy and straightforward way of beginning to understand what works in classrooms and what doesn't work in classrooms. Thank you very much, Ira Listari. Thank you very much. You can make a questionnaire to find out the problems. Absolutely. You can make a questionnaire to find out the problems. So you can ask questions, some questions in your questionnaires. Did you find this difficult? How difficult, how easy or difficult was it? From 0 to 10, yes, I understood the teacher, or 5 out of 10 for understanding the teacher. Okay, yes, absolutely. So those are two very good examples, of how to begin to see what works in your classrooms. Okay, looking and finding out through questionnaires. Another very important way to find out about what works is to think about your lesson plan. After you have delivered your lesson plan, you can go back over your lesson plan, go through it and say, well, that was my plan, but actually that piece didn't work, or that activity didn't work how I planned. In fact, it worked better, or it didn't work as well as I wanted it to do. And so reflection is another way that we can think about gathering up information about what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so we've got questionnaires, we've got watching, so observing, we've got reviewing and reflecting. Any other examples of how we might find out what works in classrooms?
How about the examinations? Can we know the problems through what happened in the class 3 examinations they have?
Absolutely. And this is what Miss Jones here did. She gave everyone an exam to find out, what students know as gathered up through this test. Okay, so the test had a question about, I don't know, some chemistry topic that I don't know about. and so it was, I don't know, design an experiment. And so name the instruments in a chemistry experiment. So that's one way of finding out what it is that students know, and if they know the right words for the right things in chemistry or in an experiment. Absolutely. Any other ways? So we've got observation, so looking. We've got questionnaires as one. We've got reflections on your own lesson plans. We've got examinations. Any other examples? If you
Can I answer that?
Yes, please, Harita, go ahead.
How about the interview the students?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Ask. You can. That's a really good question. Good answer. Ask. You can ask the students what it is. You can ask them all sorts of things, but through interviews. And we can have, of course, different types of interviews. We can have interviews where it's one interviewer and an interviewee, so it's just two people. But we can also have group interviews, or referred to as focus groups, where there are a group of students. You can ask a question, or the interviewer asks a question, and you let them talk and discuss amongst each other. Absolutely. And even sometimes within classes, teachers will do that to have a small point for discussion at the end of a class, where students can come together and talk about what they've learnt and what they want to know more about. So those are really good examples of how we can begin to find out. Any other ways that we can begin to find out what works in classrooms? One I'm sure you're very familiar with is, well, you're more familiar with than I am, is about conducting experiments. It's about conducting experiments. So giving, if you like, having a control group, an experiment trying one set of students and a different one with a different set of students, and then comparing across results. So lots and lots of different ways in which we can conduct research and we can investigate what works in classrooms and what doesn't work in classrooms. Okay. It is important, part of my reason for showing you these words here about investigate, explore, find out, examine and search, is that you will obviously, when you're reading and when you're writing about research, these are important words to use. And it's important to be able to understand that they all are engaged with and they all are relevant to explaining and reporting on conducting research. Okay. Is that okay? I want to move on now a little bit to what, oh, there we go. Wait, hang on. There we go. Okay, to some which I hope are familiar concepts. And these familiar concepts that I want to just talk about, one is about quality and one is about quantity. Okay. Can I ask you, when you think about the word quality, what does it mean to you? Okay. When you think about quality, what does quality mean? And if you want to type it into the chat, please, by all means, if it's in English or Bahasa Indonesian, that doesn't matter. Benny, you can translate for me if that's okay.
I
But
will.
quality, thank you. Quality, what does quality mean to you? When you think about quality, what does it mean to you?
Everyone, if you want to answer Dr. Aisling questions, you might unmute button, please. You can answer in Indonesian and I will translate. Saya terjemahkan dalam bahasa Inggris. Kalau misalnya nggak tahu bahasa Inggrisnya, silakan dalam bahasa Indonesia, saya akan terjemahkan. Silakan adik-adik semuanya. Ibu tadi bertanya kalau quality itu berhubungan dengan apa, seperti apa. Kalau quantitative itu berhubungan dengan apa. Contohnya apa yang berhubungan dengan kuantitas. I try to translate your question, Aisling.
Yes, no, that's brilliant. And I heard the word quantitas there, and I
yeah, it's true. Yes, in Indonesian, quantity means quantitas, quality is qualitas. So tas at the end, P replaced by tas.
Very good. That shows we have shared words to work with. That's brilliant. Thank you. Anybody want to type into chat? Or
may I try to answer?
Please do. Yes, please go ahead. Nasrul, please go ahead.
Thank you. For me, quality is some of we can measure in description, but in quantity we can measure in using number like that.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really, and very often they go together, don't they? Quality and quantity, they're very often presented together. But yes, absolutely. About description, the quality is about description, what it's like, what kind of thing it is, and quantity is about counting and numbers of things. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Nasrul. Thank you.
You're welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much. And so very different ways. So different concepts because they tend to look at things in very different ways. I've put this picture up here. So this is paper. This is just sheets of paper. We're all teachers, so paper is something that's essential to us. We think about paper as think about the same thing, paper. How would you describe the quality of the paper? You have to, as Nasrul describes it, you have to talk about qualities. You have to use descriptive words to do it. Is it soft? Is it thin? Is it thick? What does it feel like? You can see me doing this with my hands. What does it feel like when I look at those pieces of paper? Oh, actually, I like the blue one. The blue one's very strong. What does it feel like? What is that like? And feeling paper involves me. It involves me being able to touch it. And so that is an experience that this paper gives me. The color of the paper comes to my eyes. So it's about my experiences. To be able to talk about quality, I have to think about what its experience is for me. Okay, quality. If we talk about quantity, what might we talk about in terms of quantity of paper? Does anybody want to come on ahead? Anyone? Well, for quantity, we might talk about the size of the paper. What size is the paper? Is it, is it A4? Is it A2? Is it, oh no. Is it a bigger piece of paper? What size is the paper? We might also talk, this looks like very fancy, posh paper. So we might talk about how much it weighs. We might talk about, does this paper weigh, 50 milligrams? Does it weigh 10 milligrams? We might talk about the weight of the paper. And we also might talk about how many sheets of paper that we have. Okay, so those are all just sort of very basic everyday examples about the differences when we look at quality and we look at quantity. Okay, and that's so one is the quality is about description, the feel, the experience, and the quantity, as Nasrul said, is very much about the numbers. It's about how many, how big, what size, and those kind of more statistical, numerical based descriptions. They're still descriptions in a way of this paper. So I want you to, if you're ever in doubt sometimes about the difference between quality and quantity, think about touching paper. Okay, think about feeling the paper. I have to describe that paper, and I can describe it. I can describe the qualities of that paper, and I can also describe it quantitatively as well. Okay, so bear those in mind. I hope that's a useful example. That's a rather abstract everyday example. So I want to show you now some examples from Miss Jones. So our chemistry teacher, Miss Jones, she wants to know what's happening in her classroom, what's going on. And so Miss Jones has got two different ways of, she's got more than two different ways, but for us, we'll say that she can become a qualitative researcher or she can become a quantitative researcher. So thinking about our discussion of paper there a moment ago, we can think about from a qualitative perspective. Mrs. Jones is interested in the experiences. She's interested in the feelings. She's interested in what things are like. And so some of the research questions that Miss Jones might ask as a qualitative researcher are, I've listed some examples here. So what are my students' experiences of the science program? Okay. Now, is that open or is that closed? I can see people nodding, so I hope you're all going to say open. It's open. It's very, yeah. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. So it's very much open. So qualitative research is very much about searching for answers that you don't know. Okay, it's what are their experiences of the science program? Okay, I'm not sure what they are. I don't know what the answer is. It's very much about exploring what those are, keeping them open. Okay. So you want to know about what are their experiences, and you can gather up some of their experiences. What do they think of the science program? So do they like it? Do they not like it? Do they find it easy? Do they find it difficult? But what do they find easy? What do they find difficult? What is challenging about the program? Okay, so we're not just interested in do you like it, do you not like it, but we're interested in going a little bit deeper with our description. Okay, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And also we can look at the kinds of questions that teachers really, really want the answers to that are quite difficult to answer. You know, why do some students succeed on this program and others do not? Okay. And so you can think about those very deep and serious questions and ask them and see what kind of information and data that we can gather to be able to answer those very qualitatively feeling questions. So it's about experiences, it's about people's perceptions, it's about their own engagement with the world. So that's really what qualitative, and you think about your paper again, what's it like? How can we describe it? From a quantitative perspective, you might want to, think about Miss Jones as well as doing it from a quantitative perspective. Look and see, well, how many students passed the test? How can I measure an increase in achievement? Okay, so using a baseline and then marking up to the next level, how can I measure that? And very often when measurement is involved, how much have they improved? Those, when you hear the words how much, that's when we're getting into quantitative research. Another aspect of quantitative research, which makes it very different to qualitative research, is it's interested in cause and effect. Okay, so what causes students to learn? Okay, cause and effect, so a direct relationship, is very often in research bound with statistical tendencies. It's bound with numerical data. Okay, and so that's something, cause and effect is not something that we would talk about in qualitative research. Qualitative research is much more around the description of what is happening rather than the cause of something happening. Okay, another example of what a quantitative researcher might investigate is what technique produces the highest scores. So thinking about, I'm going to show students, I'm going to take this one method of showing students how to, I don't know, mix chemicals. Forgive me, I don't know what I'm talking about. So one of those examples, so I'm going to just use this one method or one technique, one teaching practice, and I'm going to see what are the scores of my students at the end of this, and I'm going to use a different technique with a different set of students or same set of students and do that. So we're getting into our experimental work there. Okay, and again, so those are, that kind of discussion, that kind of investigation is very much based on numerical, being able to produce numerical data. Okay, does anybody have any questions about what we've talked, or what I've talked about so far? No? Okay.
Ada yang ingin bertanya tentang perbedaan kualitatif dan kuantitatif penelitian ini? Tidak ada. Okay, I think no, Dr. Aisling, you might go ahead.
Perfect. That's okay. That's good. That's good. Okay. Now, this, it's important that when you think about qualitative research, that you do engage with some of the research methods literature on qualitative research. It is a very, very, very big area, and it's really useful if, when you are conducting qualitative research, to engage with writing and research that's relevant to what it is that you're going to do. Okay, so it's clear. Thank you very much, Ira. Thank you. Okay, and so throughout all of the sessions, I will be giving you some suggested references, and these are key references within the contemporary field of qualitative research. Now, they are not the only ones, okay? And I would really strongly encourage you to read as widely as possible within your own Indonesian context around qualitative research and in other contexts as well, okay? And I think that's really, really important. And because there's not one way of doing qualitative research, Okay, and it's really important that you engage with a range of literature. So you'll see that these references that I'm providing here, some of them are really quite old, but they've been quite dominant in the field, and that's why I want to share them with you. They're what we might call as some of the very key references to literature that you might want to use. But please also explore on your own. Explore, there's that word again. Explore on your own to find other sources which talk about what qualitative research is and what qualitative research isn't. Okay, so I really do hope that this is the start of your interest in qualitative research. And so just very, very clear in this extract from Miriam in 2009. It's rather than determining cause and effect, rather about predicting or describing the distribution of some attribute among a population. Qualitative researchers are interested in uncovering the meaning of the phenomenon of those involved. Okay, understanding how people interpret their experiences, how they construct their worlds, and what meaning they attribute to their experiences. Okay, that's quite a lengthy quotation. If I could give you a little bit of homework, I would invite you to take a look at this quotation and look at the words used. You can see here, quantitative research is about cause and effect. It's about predicting, describing distribution of some attribute among a population. Okay, so if when you go home later on, if you want to do some revision, you could make a list. Okay, here are words associated with quantitative research, and here are words associated with qualitative research. Okay, of course there will be words that will work across, but sometimes there are distinct words. So if we're talking about cause and effect, that's very much a quantitative feature of quantitative based research. If we're talking about interpreting experiences, that's very much something that we would come across in qualitative research. Okay, distribution in a population, those are the words that fall into the quantitative side of research. How people make meaning of their experiences, very much about qualitative research. And I think that's important. In some of the examples that I'll show you in session 2, I'll show you some, if I might say, bad examples of qualitative research, which actually uses quite a lot of quantitative terminology. And that sometimes shows us that there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the purpose of qualitative research. Okay. And if in any doubt, always go back to your pieces of paper. Quality and quantity. Okay, always think about those. Okay, so moving on a little bit. So what is qualitative research? And I've tried to kind of, again, if you want to think in these terms, qualitative research is about understanding people's experiences. Okay, how can I understand people's experiences? Well, I'm not sure. How can I can begin to understand them when they tell me about their experiences? Okay, and that's key. If we think about how can I understand people's experiences? How can I understand my students' experience of doing that experiment? I need to somehow try to get into their world. That's really what qualitative research is about, trying to understand other people's experiences. And we not only want to understand the experiences that people have, but we want to be able to understand what meanings do people have from those experiences. So if we take our science class and we talk about an experiment, how do I understand people's experiences of that? I could ask them about it. What did you do? Can you explain to me how you made that experiment, how you set it up. But we also want to understand some of their meanings that they would attribute to that. Could you understand? What did you understand about that? Why were you doing that? Do you think it's important to do that? So those are the kinds of things that we're interested in. Okay. So one of the so those are key, I think. And from now on, we won't have this comparison between quantitative and qualitative. It's very useful sometimes to compare in order for us to mark out what is qualitative and what is quantitative. But from now on in our discussion, we just focus on qualitative research rather than drawing the contrast, if that's okay. Okay, now, of course, the big question then is how? How can we understand people's experiences, and how can we interpret meanings that people bring to their lived experiences and to their worlds? Okay, thinking about, if you remember our examples. So our examples, if you can remember, where when I talked about Miss Jones and finding out, so one of our examples was looking, about observing. Okay. And the others that were suggested, I think it was by Ira Listari, was about questionnaires. Okay, I think I had also said about teachers' reflection, and Harida had also suggested interviews. Isn't that right? I've got that right, haven't I? Yes, I think so. I see Harida nodding, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, all right. So we're thinking about observing, questionnaires, reflection, and interviews. Okay. If we think about observing, is that when we think about observing and looking, will that help us understand people's experiences? Yes or no?
Dengan mengobservasi, apa kita bisa memahami pengalaman seseorang, misalnya di kelas gitu? Iya apa enggak, teman-teman? Ada yang bisa jawab? Dengan observasi kita bisa paham enggak apa pengalaman orang gitu? Silakan unmute yang mau jawab. Silakan unmute. Oh, not yet, Bu Asling. Someone said not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because, and this is what we talk a bit more about this later on, and hopefully through these examples. If we look, it depends how we look, doesn't it? Because we can look and we can count, for example, how many times the student asks their neighbor a question. And once we count, we're getting into quantitative elements, absolutely. Observing, we could say, right, well, I'm interested in mapping out what it is that the student does moment by moment. And that could give us, if you like, a description of what happens in the classroom. And when we talk about descriptions of what happens in the classroom, absolutely, we're talking about qualitative research. So you're sorry, I didn't get your name there, but yes, not yet is a really good example, is a really good answer. Questionnaires, likewise. I think Ira, you mentioned questionnaires. Some questionnaires will have questions that require you to give an answer, and that answer might be how much did you learn? 0 for nothing and 10 for a lot. Okay, so again, that could be we're beginning to use a measurement which clicks us into numerical data. But there may be, and it happens in some instances, questionnaires which have open questions, which say, please can you describe your experience of conducting this experiment, or something like that. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes there's not always a one-to-one mapping for a particular method and in a particular approach. So you could have an observation which did collect both quantitative data and qualitative data, in the same way that you could have a questionnaire which would produce both quantitative data, and if it had some open questions, as the ones I've just described, it would also be producing qualitative data as well. Okay. Great. Now, I want us to talk just to move on a little bit, if that's okay, to talk about some matter. Oh, hang on. Sorry. There we go. So, looking at this picture, so imagine this is Miss Jones's classroom. Okay, so oh, hang on. There we go. Imagine this is Miss Jones' classroom. Some of the, and I hope this is a fairly, I mean, this I hope is recognized as the kind of group work in a classroom. They're dealing with, it looks like robotics or programming of some sort. Okay, and people are doing different things. Not everyone's doing the same thing. Okay. Part of the, I mentioned observations. Part of the good thing about conducting observations is that they are sometimes very exploratory, and they often can be the beginning of a piece of research. So observation can sometimes be the start of a research project. So looking around, identifying what's a particular situation, what is the particular context. And very often that exploratory stage is very much driven by some of the important features of qualitative research. Okay, so qualitative research, by what it aims to do, is to understand people's experiences and to interpret meaning. So it often begins on a small scale. So here you can see in this picture, there are 5 children. Okay, so it's not, you're not in qualitative research, you're starting off usually in a relatively small number of participants. Okay, you think about something like quantitative, it's large, it's 200 questionnaires, it's 500 questionnaires, it's 5,000 questionnaires. If you're thinking about experiments, there has to be 50 children in one class and 50 children in the other in order for the data to be subject to statistical exploration. But normally, if you want to examine something, if you're curious, if you want to explore, qualitative research is very often the first step to conducting that research. So just looking at this image of 5 children learning about science, robotics, programming, whatever it is, you look at that and you can begin to try to understand what's going on, what is happening here, and what might be their experiences. And so key to qualitative research is the idea of interpretation. Okay, so trying to understand what is the meaning here. All right, meaning, you can think about interpretation as in interpreting from Bahasa Indonesian into English. No, it's interpreting. So you're interpreting this picture into something else, into something that's going to provide an answer to the research question that you have. Okay, so here is this real life, everyday instance of people working with one another of a classroom, and you want to examine that. You want to examine that to be able to understand, right, what is this child doing? What is he or she doing? And what is this child doing in response to what is happening here? Okay, is he or she talking as they are moving the object? What's happening over here? Is this student helping this student, or is it actually the other way around? What's going on? How are they learning? What about this student here? This one isn't talking to anybody. This student is working on their own. All right. We begin to look closely at these situations, real life situations, and try to see, right, well, what's happening here? What's good for learning? What's maybe not so good for learning? How are pupils working together? How can teachers in this situation prepare the materials that are going to work best, or how can they prepare students for the kinds of tasks that they have to do. Related to this is this notion of subjectivity. Okay, so I just want to really say a little bit about subjectivity. Subjectivity is very much concerned with, I'm looking at this picture and it has been taken from a particular angle. Okay, imagine you are the photographer here. You have taken this photograph from a particular angle. That is what you see. Okay, now if you were the photographer taking it from another position, taking it, say, from near the yellow radiator, you would see a different picture. Okay, you wouldn't see, you would only see the backs of these 4 children's heads. You wouldn't see what they were doing. You would only see this one child, and you may think they're all working quietly on their own. Okay, so subjectivity is about the particular position from which we all look at the world. Okay, and so that's important. It's an important part of qualitative research, and it's incredibly important when we think about our analysis of the data that we produce. And I'll come back to that when we talk about that. So small scale tends to be small numbers because you want data that can be looked at in depth rather than going wide across a large number of people. You want in-depth data, so it tends to be small scale. It's very much about understanding the actions that are happening here and what's going on. There is, within qualitative research, the tendency for a focus on textual data. So I think it was Nasrul mentioned about quantitative data, quantity being about numbers and statistics. In qualitative research, it tends to be around textual data. So Harita mentioned interviews. So you work with the transcriptions of interviews. If you're looking at classroom observations, you may record the classroom and you may transcribe what has been said. In group interviews, you transcribe what has been said. So you're working with words, with textual data. Now, again, there are many different ways of working with different types of data, and we can work with visual data as well. We can work with art that's produced from participants. We can look at photographs that are produced from participants as well. So that's why I've said there's a tendency for textual data. It's not the only type of data, as other arts-based data sources can also be used. How people use artifacts and language is just one of those artifacts. Okay. I suppose it is important to say what qualitative research isn't about. Okay, and it's really not about generalizing. Okay, it's not about generalizing across lots and lots of people or a particular population. So when Miss Jones, if I go back to this question, Miss Jones wants to find out what are my students' experiences of the science program. Okay, Miss Jones is only interested in her students' experiences of her science program. There's no way that the information gathered there can be generalized to Mr. Smith's or Mr. Carolina's or Mr. any other teacher. That's not what the qualitative research is about. It's not about generalizing to all of the chemistry classrooms that happen in a particular school. It's about finding out what's happened in this one particular context. Okay, so that's what we mean about generalizable. It's not taking what happens in the investigation of a small scale setting and applying it large scale, applying the results large scale. That's not what it's about. Objectivity is kind of the alternative to subjectivity. Objectivity is very much about, here is doesn't matter what position I look at something from, if I use the right tools, I will get the information that I need. It doesn't matter the positioning of the researcher, it doesn't matter the positioning of the methods or anything else. Large scale, absolutely. In order to run the kind of statistical tests that are required to look at cause and effect, absolutely large scale research needs to be conducted, even on, you know, questionnaires, experiments. It involves numbers and large scale and big numbers, large numbers. Very much quantitative research is about seeking causes, and that's not what qualitative research is about. It's maybe about looking at what influences. It's maybe about looking at things that can contribute to things, but it's certainly not about cause and effect. Okay. And as I think Nasril said before, the numerical data is absolutely key to that. It's key to building up the kinds of statistical relationships between different data sets. And so that's really important. Okay, I'm going to stop and ask if you have any questions. And I also realize I'm starting to speed up a bit in my words, so I'll just pause a moment to slow down. So does anyone have any questions or comments or things that you want to share?
Apakah ada yang ingin bertanya? Apakah menurut Bapak dan Ibu atau adik sekalian penjelasan dari Ibu Aisling terlalu cepat? Tadi beliau nanya terlalu cepat nggak atau sedang-sedang saja? Gimana?
Oke, Mbak Penny. Mbak Pen,
yes.
ada satu pertanyaan Mbak Pen buat
Silakan.
Dr. Aisling.
Silakan,
Barangkali
Ibu.
tadi disebutkan. Sorry, I'm not speaking in English.
Sorry, I'm not speaking in Indonesian. It's the bigger story here. I'm sorry. That's the bigger story.
In the first one that you say that kualitatif itu adalah yang tadi small scale gitu ya. Jadi untuk small scale, nah small scale-nya itu ada batasannya nggak kira-kira? Jadi kan ini ada medium, large scale. Jadi kalau misalnya jumlah siswa kita ada, dan misalnya satu kelas itu ada 40, lalu kemudian kita coba buat penelitian kemudian untuk 2 kelas 80, apakah itu masih bagian dari small scale? Atau satu kelas saja sudah cukup gitu menyatakan itu small scale? Harus 2 kelas? Jadi ada batasannya nggak kira-kira gitu?
Siap, Ibu.
Indonesianya.
Ibu Aisling, Ibu Ira is a lecturer at pre-chemistry pre-service teachers. She asked you about the small scale limitations. What is meant by small scale? Is that any limitation for that? Do you think that like one class with 40 students is considered small scale? Or maybe perhaps like 2 classes, 80 students, are they considered small scale? So could you please explain that?
Brilliant. Yes, no, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, because when we use words like small and large, they are qualitative descriptions. They are absolutely, indeed. They are qualitative descriptions. So completely. And what will be small in some instances is not, so I'll give an example. So I work sometimes in corpora, and if we're talking about examples of written data, if we have a corpus of written data and it's 1 million words, that's small. But if we have a corpus of spoken data of 1 million words, that's big. And it's because they're both very different things. So written data, when people write, they tend to write thousands and thousands of words at one time. When people speak, we don't tend to speak thousands and thousands of words. Well, this lecture might be different, but we don't tend to speak. You know, we've got 1,000 words in 15 minutes, whereas writing tends to be a lot bigger than that. So I absolutely get that I'm using qualitative terminology to be able to describe this. I suppose it's small scale, and it's maybe not the small part, but rather the small scale, taking that together. So could you have a class, and small scale often refers to the manageability. Small scale, if you can manage to collect a certain amount of data, if you can manage to examine that data in depth, then it could be something like 3 students. You're engaged with 3 students. You're doing interviews with maybe 8, 10, 12 students. If you're conducting a questionnaire, you're into your 10s and your 100s. So your answer around, is it small scale research if I do it with 40 students, or is 80 students small scale research? The answer, I'm sorry, depends on what your research question is, right? Because if you're, and what it is that you're studying, if the class itself is the unit, is the phenomenon you want to focus on, well then that's 1 class and that's 2 class. So that's small scale, you know, regardless of how many people are in that class. If your class is your focus, then you've got 1 class and you want to compare it with another class. If it's about individuals within that class, well then straight away, wow, there's 40 individuals there. That seems quite a lot. You know, if you have to conduct 40 interviews, that seems quite a lot. That does. And then if you're conducting 80 interviews, that also seems quite a lot. Okay. But if you're taking, if you're focusing on high achieving students, or you're focusing on low achieving students within that 1 class, that again, that gives you a bit more context of what small scale means in that situation. So it kind of, people always say, how many interviews do I need for that? And I think it's a really good question, because recently, and qualitative researchers have always fought against giving a minimum number. Always have traditionally fought against. And I remember having these conversations in my own staff room, where a colleague would be saying some of the most seminal and influential work was conducted with 3 interviews. It was reported and conducted with 3 interviews. However, I have to say that in recent times, I think a lot of the qualitative research academic community have been quite surprised that journal publications have begun to say, no, even if you are doing qualitative research, you need a minimum number of interviews, for example. And that kind of goes against everything, all the principles of conducting qualitative research, because numbers shouldn't matter. And that's so there is a very current debate, and I think we need to be mindful of that as early career researchers or starting out in qualitative research, that some of the bigger journals will have said, no, we will say that there's a minimum of however many interviews. Now, I don't, and a lot of people would disagree with that, but that's the current situation that we're in. But when we think about small scale, it goes back to what I mentioned there about what is the thing that you're looking at. If the thing that you're looking at is, you know, low achievement, well, you've maybe got the bottom 5 in your class, for example, and that's what you want to focus on. Small scale, I mean, we have had a small scale experimental study which did have about 100 students. It was 50 in one and 50 in the other. So again, it was relatively small scale. It was contextualized, and I think that's I'm sorry, this might sound a bit avoiding the question to say a minimum, but I think it always goes back to what it is that you're looking at, and small scale means about really being able to make it manageable and feasible for the project, so that you get enough data out of what you have here to be able to say something meaningful. And I think that's kind of what the important is. So yeah, but I think it is also important to bear in mind that some journals, if you're thinking about publications, they will put down, say, for example, minimum numbers of interviews, which has difficulties, but I think if you're thinking forward for publications, it's useful to bear that in mind. The other thing about numbers and how many interviews is very often there's not just one source of data, and I'll show you some of this in a minute. So it's So qualitative research tries to capture experiences and meanings in different ways. So it might be through interviews, but it might be through interviews plus focus groups, plus observations. So there tends to be a body of data that gets constructed, and there are different parts to that. And very often it's that which helps to contribute to making your analysis convincing. So something that you find in the interviews, you've also found in the observations, or something like that. So that is often small scale but intensive and deep. It tends to be. So I'm sorry, that's waffling about how many, what is the minimum. I mean, you will hear people will talk about studies, you know, if you're conducting, you know, what seems a reasonable amount. So if you have a class of, you know, 40 people and you want to find out, like Miss Jones did, about their experiences, she might want to conduct interviews with maybe, if she's focus groups with maybe half of her students, something like that. So one of her students might not be enough if she wants to get all of the students' experiences. And she might offer different ways of doing that. She might offer individual interviews, but she might also offer group interviews as well. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I hope it provides some detail.
Mbak Ira udah itu paham, udah oke, get the point. Ya, jadi bisa bisa 3, bisa 5 tadi ya. 5 pun boleh kalau misalnya based on misalnya low achiever kayak gitu. Yang dasar gitu. Kalau focus group discussions juga bisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aisling. You may go ahead.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I'll try and find out that reference for you as well to that journal, because it's interesting to read as well. Okay, brilliant. Okay, all right. If I may, I would like us to look now at some examples of qualitative research which have been conducted with science teachers. Okay, now forgive me, I don't know what separation of mixtures is. Okay, I'm really hoping that you all, so is this correct? Does this picture look, I Googled. So I Googled what is separation of mixtures, and this is the picture that I got. Is this right?
Itu betul gak gambarnya, kata Bu Aisling? Karena Bu Aisling bukan dari science, itu betul udah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. That's right, Ibu Aileen.
Okay.
You.
Okay.
The simple methods for the separative mixture.
Brilliant. Phew, I've got it right. That's good. That's okay. That's
analytical chemistry.
Okay.
Analytical chemistry.
Fabulous. Whew, I got the right picture. And so this paper, and this is a paper from 12 years ago, but you know, these are good examples of papers. So these this paper was interested in how pre-service chemistry teachers, which I'm hoping are you, how you choose your instructional strategy. How do you choose what teaching methods you do? Okay, so if you want to teach about the separation of mixtures, which methods do you choose? Which teaching practices do you choose? And so this study conducted here, you'll see conducted by Aydin Boz and Boz in Turkey, looked at how do pre-service teachers choose which methods to use? Okay, the research question here is, in teaching the separation of mixtures, what influenced pre-service teachers' choice of methods? So does that kind of sound like a qualitative question to you, or a quantitative?
Could you repeat your question, please?
Sorry, yes, sorry, Benny, sorry. So looking at that research question that's here, does that look like it's a qualitative research question, or does it look like it's more designed to be conducted through quantitative research?
Oke, dari pertanyaan ini lebih condong ke penelitian kualitatif atau ke penelitian kuantitatif, Bapak Ibu dan adik-adik sekalian? Silakan unmute.
I think it's qualitative.
Yes, I saw a few people who were on mute, but I saw you all say qualitative, so I'm taking that. So thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
His question is what influences, so it's qualitative, I think.
That's it. Absolutely. That's right. It's what influences. And if you think about at the moment, you just take a moment to think about what influences pre-service teachers' choice. Well, what might influence pre-service teachers' choice of methods? What do you think? I always think it's a good idea when you think about a research question to think about what are the possible answers to this. I don't know. I don't know, but I can think, I can wonder what might influence teachers. What do you think, before you read anything, what do you think might influence teachers' instruction? So how one teaches, what do you think influences how one teaches?
Are you asking what might influences pre-service teachers in separations mixture? Okay.
No, not that far.
So what was the question?
Sorry,
The method
Benny.
of teaching, I think.
Yeah,
Yes.
just in general, what do you think? In general, what do you think influences how teachers teach? Sorry.
Menurut Bapak Ibu sekalian, apa yang mempengaruhi seorang guru dalam mengajar, dalam memilih metode belajar?
Time consuming. Time that we have to spend.
Time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And the
The materials that they have, absolutely, yeah.
Material characteristic.
Oh, there's in the chat.
Yes.
Students, yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely, yeah.
Student characteristic.
Yeah, yes. Students' characteristics.
It
might.
Dalaman materi apa ya? The subject matter-nya barangkali.
Yeah.
Gaya belajar.
A learning style, Ibu Hairida answers.
Learning
Yes.
style. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Harida. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are ideas that we have, but we don't know. we don't know. But these are some of the ideas that we have. Yeah, school infrastructures, that's a good one as well. Yeah, yeah. How big is the classroom? How is the classroom equipped? Absolutely, yeah. So these are things that we can think about, but we actually don't know. So we need to find out, and we want to find out what influences teachers. And so this is a good example of having a qualitative question and being able to try to find the answer to that. Now, if you have a look here, you'll see I have underlined it in red. So this is from the abstract, okay? This is only the abstract from this paper, okay? And so I've underlined the methods, so the ways in which the researchers have gone about looking for answers to this particular question, okay? So they have semi-structured interviews. So interviews, Harida, I think, mentioned earlier about interviews. Lesson plans, so I mentioned about lesson plans. Participants' reflections on their teaching. Okay, so that's the teacher sitting down and thinking, how did it go? What did I think of it? What worked well? What didn't work well? And also observation, so classroom observation of participants' instruction on the separation of mixtures. Okay, so you can see there there were a number of different methods. So semi-structured, lesson plans, participants' reflections, and observations. Okay, so there were multiple ways in which data was gathered. Okay, when we think about semi-structured interviews, those interviews will have been recorded and transcribed. Usually interviews are recorded and transcribed. The lesson plans, you can imagine, you know yourself, what lesson plans look like, and you, I'm sure, share each lesson plans with each other.
Sorry, Bu Aisling. So you just asked about the research methods that the teacher. Okay, so the participants ask answers about the teaching methods. So
no, that's right. That's right. No, that's right. No,
my apology.
That's
I translated into the wrong way.
No, Venny, that's right. That's
Okay.
correct. What you were doing is correct. That is absolutely correct. That's correct. No, I'm moving on a bit. So that's our everyday understanding of how teachers would do that. No, that's absolutely correct, Venny. That's correct. Thank you. And so now I'm just moving on. No, because I'm conscious of time, so I just want to keep moving. If that's okay. No, that's absolutely perfect. That's perfect. So these. My point here is that these methods of gathering data, so the interviews, the lesson plans, the reflections and the observations, they will all be textual data. So when we work with interviews and lesson plans and reflections, they tend to come down to be textual data. So they're not numbers. Okay, they are recordings that we listen to. They are, if they're the participants' reflections, the things that we write down. So these are the examples that I wanted to kind of just remind you are largely textual, and that's what, when we are writing up reports, we tend to have to produce a textual version of a recording. Okay, so even if you have recorded your interview, it's an audio recording, it'll come up on your phone or whatever it is, but it has to be transcribed. It has to then become a piece of text, a piece of writing. Okay, I'm looking for a book coming up. So a piece of writing. So what I'm trying to show here is that our qualitative data it tends to be textual. So we have to deal with words. We have to engage with them in that way. There are, as I've said, other arts-based methods, but for now we'll just focus on the textual-based ones. Now, what we also understand from this abstract is that the researchers, when they analysed the interviews, the lesson plans, and the reflections and the observations, what they came up with were some answers to these questions. And so the factors, the things that influenced the chemistry teachers were their mentors. Okay, that's good news for pre-service chemistry teacher educators era like you. That's good news that you can influence how they teach in classrooms. So that's good news. The students, and some of you said that already, didn't you? You said about the students. The topic taught. Okay, so the topic taught, that had an influence on how it was taught. General pedagogical knowledge. So that's kind of how we understand that how to manage a classroom, how to set up an activity. Your own learning style. So I think, Harida, you mentioned that as well. Subject matter knowledge. So how much chemistry knowledge had a bit of an influence on the instructional practice that the pre-service teachers used. Someone also said about availability of materials. So you're absolutely, your ideas have been confirmed here. And that's very often really important. Okay, is because as teachers with experiences, we have an understanding of what happens in classrooms, but sometimes people want evidence. It's almost as if our word as teachers is not enough. And Therefore, we need to conduct qualitative research to be able to show this is the evidence for this. So I know that my pre-service teachers are influenced by the availability of materials. So if materials aren't available, then my teachers don't teach in the best method. You know, very often this is the evidence that we need. And so this is why particularly teacher-based qualitative research is really important, because it gives an evidence base to show what is happening in classrooms, which can then inform future recommendations. So that's kind of important as well. Okay, any questions about what we've talked about here? No questions on separation of mixtures, please. Ira, I'll defer to you for that one. But any questions here about this?
I guess no.
I guess no.
Yeah.
This is, sorry. I mean, this is a good research question. You know, it's a feasible question. It's good to do. It matches well with all of the characteristics of qualitative research, and therefore it's a good example of conducting qualitative research. You'll see here that there were 6 chemistry teachers. So to go back to your numbers of how many, what's small scale and what's not small scale. So there were 6 chemistry teachers involved in this particular study. When you think about 6 interviews, 6 sets of lesson plans, 6 reflections, 6 observations, that builds up to quite a substantial body of data, which then has to be analysed in detail. So quite a significant amount here. Okay.
Actually, I have one question.
Yes, please, Benny.
Ibu Aisling. I wonder, I'm a bit surprised that this paper has only one research question. Is it okay for sending an article with only one research question?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very interesting. Yes, it's the short answer. Yes is the short answer. In some of the papers, they may have one research question and then maybe some sub questions, and that's also fine. But yes, I mean, if that's what you're, that's what you're interested in here, yeah, absolutely, yeah. If they may have only one research question, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Brilliant. Thank you, Venny. That's a really important question as well, actually.
Yeah, because I'm a quantitative one, because quantitative like have so many questions,
That's
and
right.
sub research questions as well.
That's right. I mean, that's a really good point, because you have to produce your questions in relation to hypotheses.
Yes.
So then you tend to get them all broken down into, if this doesn't happen, then this might happen, then this might happen, then this might happen. Absolutely, you're right. Whereas, yeah,
with variables,
absolutely, yes, correct. Yep. So that's important. Thank you for pointing that out. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aisling.
Okay, another paper I want to go through with you here as well. Now, this is even, my chemistry knowledge is even worse here. So, okay, whoops. There we go. Okay. I don't even know how to say this word. Is this titration? Is that right? Is that right, yes. Harita? Harita says yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And is this what it is?
Titration itu apa, Mbak Ira?
Titrasi itu apa ya? Titrasi di Indonesia bahasanya.
Right. Okay.
In Indonesia is titrasi.
Right. Okay. Titrasi. Okay. So that's okay. Okay. All right. So the focus of this particular research paper, so it's research in science education, is from 2021. So the focus here is on how do chemistry teachers deal with students' incorrect responses in oral classroom questions? Okay. So the focus here is on how teachers, what happens when teachers ask a question and the students don't give the correct answer. Okay, that's what this paper was interested in. Okay, what do teachers do when they don't get the right answer back? Okay, so one of the situations, one of the examples in the paper is about the chemistry concept of titration. So the teacher was asking students about their knowledge of titration. So this seems to be an everyday occurrence that would happen in science classrooms where there is an information check, so a knowledge check. The teacher is asking, what do you know about this science concept or science idea, either as revision or as thinking about either this is going to be the topic of today's question. So in this instance, the research question is actually the title of the paper. Okay, all right. So, sorry. This is the research question. Now, Dr. Carlina, within this paper, there are a number of other research questions as well, but this is the main research question, and it actually forms the title of the paper. Okay. Okay. Just to give you an example of what the researchers investigated, you will see here a transcription from a classroom. Okay. So the teacher, if you want to take a minute to read that. So the teacher says, let us remind ourselves about titration. Now, who can tell us what it is? Titration. Who remembers the meaning of titration? I hope this is, it certainly, it reminds me of my chemistry classes at school. Now, just try, okay? You do not remember anything about titration? And then a student begins, is a process of adding one solution. The teacher then says, student says to until. The student hesitates. The teacher repeats to until. Then the teacher shows disapproval. Okay, by looking at a different direction and looking for another student. Okay. Oh dear, that poor student. That's all I could think. That poor student. They were trying to give the answer and the teacher, no. Okay, so this kind of interaction was what these researchers were interested in. Okay, why were they interested in this kind of interaction, do you think? Why do you think that they were interested in this kind of interaction?
Can you repeat? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Sure, no problem. So the researchers here, Kimia and McKimberly, were interested in this kind of interaction that happens in science classrooms. So my question is, why do you think the researchers were interested in this kind of interaction?
Okay.
Why did they? Sorry.
Yes.
Why did they want to investigate this topic?
Oke, Ibu Aisling bertanya, mengapa menurut Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, adik-adik sekalian, Festo, Kaima, Selima, Thomas di sini sebagai researcher ingin tahu tentang interaksi antara murid dengan guru di dalam dalam belajar sains tentang titration ini. Menurut mereka, menurut Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, kenapa pengen tahu tentang interaksi feedback ini? Kenapa mereka ingin tahu tentang penelitian ini?
Barangkali mau tahu hubungan antara interaksi yang terjadi itu apakah ada kaitannya dengan pemahaman siswa pada materi ini gitu. Jadi kalau misalnya suatu materi interaksi itu apa ada pengaruhnya terhadap pemahamannya. Kalau misalnya gurunya itu memberikan jawaban yang tepat gitu ya, barangkali pemahamannya lebih baik gitu.
Iya,
Kalau
atau
interaksi
bagus apa enggak gitu ya Mbak ya.
gitu, barangkali
Oke.
gitu.
Ibu Ira told us that give the opinion that perhaps the researcher really want to know about whether the interaction is good or not for improving the knowledge of the understanding of the students on the knowledge learned. Whether is it effective or not, the way the teachers give the feedback.
Absolutely, that's absolutely it. That's it. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what they were interested in. And so, absolutely, and thank you very much. Is it Hibah Ira? Is that right? Have I said that right, Venny?
Yes, Ira.
Yes,
Okay,
Ira, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, absolutely, that's correct. That's exactly what they wanted to find out. And when we think about our classrooms, we think about textbooks, we think about tests, we think about materials, but actually most of what we do in classrooms is talk. This is an example. Most of what we do in classrooms is talk. And we talk at our students, and hopefully sometimes we've talked to our students, and sometimes hopefully they talk back. And that's really about an interest from a pedagogical perspective about how best to use that interaction to help improve the chemistry knowledge of the students in the science. Okay, so that's what they were interested in. So you tell me, how did they go about this?
What do you mean?
How did they conduct this research? So they were interested in classroom interaction. So one of the very first things that they did were to record. So you see here, so the actual teaching situations of 3 teachers were recorded. Okay, so a video, an audio recording of actual classrooms. Okay, these were transcribed and they were also analysed, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Also, remember what I said about qualitative research sometimes use different sets of data put together. So the classroom observations and the recordings of classrooms were accompanied by semi-structured interviews. Okay, semi-structured interviews. Why do you think they used interviews with the teachers?
Mengapa peneliti ini interview guru? Kenapa alasannya? Kenapa guru yang diinterview, Bapak Ibu sekalian? Kenapa dalam penelitian ini guru yang diinterview? Ada ini? Ada pendapat? Ibu Ira atau Bu Heridah, kenapa guru yang diinterview? No, sorry, I'm just why I'm pointing someone. No, sorry. I forgot.
Yang lain dong, yang lain.
Maybe Ibu Aislinn just directly give us answer.
Sure, no problem. It goes back to why we would ever interview anyone. So a few slides back, we said about interviews, we're trying to get participants' understandings of the situation. So a classroom recording captures what happens. By interviewing the teacher, we get to hear what the teacher understands has happened. Okay, and so that's the purpose of any interview. It was just, I suppose I was just trying to recall what we talked about earlier. Any interview is to try to get the participants' understanding of the particular situation. Okay, so it's to get their perceptions, their experiences, their values, the meaning that they give to those particular phenomenon that they're interested in. So that's why. So any interview is just about getting hold of the participants' experiences and their meanings and their values as well. Okay, all right. What I would like to show you is, before I come to the results, is how the teacher or how the researchers analysed this particular substantial data set. Okay, so what they did, oops, I'll move that over there, I think. Okay, so what they did was to analyse the recording of these real teaching situations. So they read all of these transcripts. Okay, so they read all of those transcripts, and by reading through the transcript, they identified the kinds of actions, behavior, or responses which teachers performed in these particular situations. Okay, so, and they produced this diagram to be able to support their analysis. All right, so they read the transcripts, they looked at the transcripts. What was the teacher doing? What were the students doing? What happened? What was the reaction to the teacher's performance? And they looked at this in relation to what, as Dr. Ira said, in relation to what's good, what helps students, what feedback helps students, but what feedback actually doesn't help students. Okay, and they looked through all of their transcripts. They will have coded, and I'll talk a bit more about that next week when we meet. They went through each of their transcripts like this one, and they coded, so they highlighted a particular section of that, and they identified that as a particular kind of action or behavior. Okay, so, and over here they have them listed here. So one of the things that they coded would be to ignore the student's views. Okay, another thing that they did was to get angry and frustrated. All right, so these are the types of categorizations that the researchers added to, interpreted from the transcript, the qualitative data transcript. Now, before I go any further, does that make sense?
How do they categorize that into those kind of approach? I mean, do they categorize that based on the previous researcher idea?
They can, in this paper, they didn't, but yes, they can. And I will talk about that a bit more in next week's class. But yes, what's really important is really what Dr. Ira had said there about the reason why the researchers conducted this research. They wanted to know what's good feedback and what's not good feedback. So when they were looking through these transcripts, okay, so when we look through these transcripts here, would you say that this is an example of good feedback or not good feedback?
The bad one, I guess.
It's kind of a bit bad, isn't it?
Yes.
Why is but why is it bad? Why is it bad?
Because it is like humiliating students.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you might code this as an example of humiliating students in your words, Venny. Yeah. Yeah. This what could have happened here? So many things could have happened. Could have been, what do you mean? Can you explain that a bit further? You know, so many good things could have happened here, but it didn't. So we're taking this as an example of, you said, Venny, bad. Then we're taking this part as humiliating. Okay. All right. And what about this part here? The teacher disapproves and then looks for someone else to respond. What does that do?
The teacher it's not really clear. I mean, the response from her or from him is not clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does
Maybe from the perform of the face, maybe can show the disproof of.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually what this does is kind of, it closes. So not only is it this student volunteered, well, they didn't volunteer, they were asked. They gave an answer. The teacher gave a response which humiliated the student a bit, and then moves on to someone different. So all of the information that the student is getting from the teacher is that they don't know anything and they're not going to respond again. You know, so it's a way of, when the researchers will have looked through all of this, they will have looked at, okay, this is a good example or this is a bad example. What is bad about it? For example, you said about humiliation, Venny, they've coded angry and frustrated. Okay. All right, so they will have come up with those, and very often there is repeated behavior, so, or repeated actions. So it's not that you have to have 100 categorizations. There won't be. The same features may well appear again and again. And this is what they did. And we've used the terms good and bad. What they have talked about is authoritative communication approach versus a dialogic communicative approach. Okay, so the authoritative approach, very much teacher-centered, focused on the teacher maintaining the power in the classroom, whereas this dialogic approach is much more balanced. Okay, where the power is much more balanced between the teacher and the student, and there is a focus on communicating knowledge with each other, not from the teacher to the student, but rather with. Okay, so that's how they have described what we have talked about as good and bad. That's how they have described it. And Dr. Venny, you're absolutely correct. It is very firmly based on past research. So the idea of authoritative communicative approach is based on previous literature. But the way that they have analyzed this data is their own. Okay, this is their own framework, if you like. They've looked through all of the transcripts, they've coded it. This is a good example of, teachers being angry and frustrated. This is a good example of ignoring students. So they have made their own codes for this. And this is a kind of a good example of how qualitative research can be presented in papers as well. Okay, so you see here they've got so these we talk about the categorization. Okay, and the categorization of the teachers, and they've also done it for the students as well. Okay, so they've also included coding for how the students reacted and acted in the classrooms. So when we think about, you might think small scale, there are only 3 teachers here, but within the classrooms and the classroom recordings, you've got the teachers and the students being able to code their actions. And then also in this paper, you also have the interviews as well. Okay. Does that make sense? Now, we will be coming back to some of this qualitative analysis and processes of qualitative analysis in our next session, but I just wanted to give you an idea, first of all, to kind of see this is really important for chemistry pre-service teachers. It's really important for all teachers, and we can do this. We can all do this, and I think that's important. Okay. Anybody have any questions on this? I know that you have to go in a minute. So any questions?
Ada yang ingin bertanya, Bapak Ibu sekalian atau adik-adik sekalian? Silakan dalam bahasa Indonesia boleh, nanti terjemahkan. Aisling, actually I have one question.
Yes, please go ahead.
So the first and the second approach, communicative approach that the teachers have done, and then that they got these informations from teachers interview, yeah, a semi-structured interview, right? While the second, this one, students' role in class activity, this is from observations.
Okay, all of this is just from the observations.
Okay.
Only from the observations. This is not yet the interview data as well. This is only from the observations. So the researchers recorded the classrooms, transcribed the classrooms, went through the transcriptions, coded, put these different instances into different categories of example of teacher ignoring student, example of exposing students' lack of knowledge, example of being angry and frustrated, example of referring to textbook material. So they coded, they categorized the transcription into these different A, B, C, D, E that you say A, B, C, E. Yeah. into these categories.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they can be called categories, they can be called codes, but that's what the teacher did, and that's what the researchers did, only on the basis of the recording, the classroom recording, and it's the same with here. Okay, so they coded in the transcript where the students remained silent, where they memorized, where the students became more engaged, where they questioned their own thinking. So that's, and we can do an example of that actually in next week's session as well. We can actually take a bit of a transcript or an interview from either an observation or from an interview, and be able to code that and to see, well, what's going on. I mean, we kind of did it here. You know, you mentioned here, this was our bad example. You know, we said this was bad, and then Venny, you looked at it and said, well, actually, this piece here is about kind of humiliation. You know, and so that's exactly the kinds of interpretation that we add to this kind of data.
So the observation, you know that the observation is too broad to observe, right? So the researchers have observations checklist, like
so not in this case. In this case, they did not have an observation checklist. Observation checklists are quite different. Observation checklists are normally prepared in advance. If you know what it is that you want to look for, then an observation checklist is, you know, is you go in to find those things. And very often there's a quantitative element to an observation checklist. So how many times did the teacher ask girls a question, for example? How many times did the teacher shout at pupils? That very often with an observation checklist, there's a predetermined features that you want to look at, and often they can be quantitative as well.
Okay, I got it.
I think it's very much, I can't remember who said it before, but observations can be quantitatively based. You know, they can be quantitatively analyzed. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not, but it's for different reasons. You know, different reasons. The thing about this is that you would not get from this analysis, when we think about paper, when we think about quality, these researchers have really described really insightfully the quality of this kind of classroom interaction. If we'd counted the number of questions that the students had asked, or the teachers had asked, counted the number of questions that the students had asked, counted the number of girls who'd asked questions, counted the number of boys who'd asked questions, that kind of quantitative data would not give us this kind of quality of where when this teacher does this is what happens to the learning opportunities. You know, so that if we think about, you know, the quality, this is only possible. We've only got this rich insight because of the ways that the researchers have really investigated the quality of this data. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay.
It's really clear.
Okay. Sorry, I know you need to go, don't you, at quarter
No, it's
two?
okay.
Is that all right? No.
Yeah.
Okay. Just one of the things that I suppose I hope, but it's so. Oops, there's chat there. Sorry. One of the things, and I'll come to an end now. One of the things I think is good to think about. I know I've suggested some homework earlier, but one of the things that you might want to think about is, why do you need to know? And I think this will be really important for our next session. Why do you need to know about qualitative research? Okay, as you are all sort of chemistry experts, so you know about research, you know about experiments, you know about being curious about the world, wanting to know how things work and what happens when, you know, this chemical makes this chemical or whatever. You're very curious people anyway, but I want you to think a little bit for yourselves, and this is only for yourselves. Why do you need to know about qualitative research? Okay, because I think that'll help us with our session on Tuesday as well. Just to stay motivated. Stay with me. Come back on Tuesday.
Okay, so
Stay.
let me translate that. Jadi
Sorry.
Bapak Ibu dan adik sekalian, minggu depan kita ada PR homework, bukan minggu depan ya, tanggal 22. Mengapa mahasiswa FKIP Kimia terutama butuh tahu tentang penelitian kualitatif? Kenapa kita perlu tentang ini? Terutama untuk mahasiswa FKIP Kimia. Okay, Dr. Aisling, I think is this the end of our meeting?
So yes, I know that you have to go, but I'm just to say, whoops.
No problem. Yes.
There we go. Just to say, our next session is next Tuesday, isn't that right?
Yes, on the 22nd of November.
22nd.
32nd, the same time, 9 o'clock there in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Pontianak.
Yes, yes. So on the 22nd of November, I really look forward to joining you. Please come if you've any questions about anything that I've talked about or any of the slides, please come with questions. I'm really happy to answer any of them. And I really look forward to, I hope this has been a good start. And then next time that we meet, we'll go more in depth with some of the things that we've talked about today. So really looking forward to it, and see you on Tuesday.
Okay, Dr. Aisling, everyone give applause to Dr. Aisling. This is very insightful and really beneficial for us. Thank you so much for your active participations. Don't forget your homework for our next sessions. Dr. Aisling, thank you so much. It is time to say goodbye. See you next on Tuesday at the same time. Thank you.
See you
Bye.
on Tuesday.
See you. Thank you, Dr.
See you on Tuesday.
Aisling.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye. You too. Bye.